G'day. Now, after a lot of thought, I've decided I'm going to do this video about yoga, and it's going to be a very deep dive. Now, this is the book. This is the book that I'm using to as the authoritative text. Now, for those people who want to see what I'm looking at, I did put up a video uh, of this book where it's just the text. And each page appears for 4 seconds. So anybody who wants to download that video or print off a hard copy with screenshots, you're most welcome to. Now, a bit of background on that book. It was written by my first teacher, friend, more of a friend than a teacher. He had started teaching, well, not teaching, he'd started practicing yoga in the early 50s after World War II. At that time, the literature was very poor, and he found it necessary to try and read the Yoga Sutra in the original. So he taught himself Sanskrit to do that. He wasn't a Sanskrit scholar, but what he produced was a big improvement, and remains so, a big improvement on anything else out there. He wanted to know what the thing actually said, what some derivative rendering by some scholar who didn't practice yoga, or some yogi who was just reading other people's books. Now, yoga is very interesting among all of the different traditions. It's a flawed philosophy. All of the philosophies are flawed. There's no single philosophy out there that can claim to be the truth, but they all have something to offer, and yoga has something special to offer. Now, the Yoga Sutra, it was kind of rediscovered by the British when they had the control of India. A lot of British intellectuals pored over Indian texts, and they more or less resurrected the Yoga Sutra. It had fallen well and truly out of favour within India itself, and it was only the rediscovery of those texts that reignited the interest that yoga is today. People who practice in the various yoga schools doing all the postures and things like that, these this is only a fraction of what yoga is about. The physical asanas are have their health benefits, but it was never intended that that was yoga. Yoga is a deep, deep philosophical investigation into the mind and trying to understand the true nature of existence. Now, the history of yoga is thousands of years old, and it's interesting from this mystical point of view, in that a lot of the techniques that yoga advocate for meditation, they form the backbone of um, the understanding of meditation across so many different traditions. There's something to understand about the history of meditation. It wasn't a situation that uh, the Indians were particularly, they didn't have a culture that, sought to understand the great truths. Their history is one of having been invaded and various outside cultures dominating them, and these cultures having brought their religions And the wandering ascetics that developed, 4,000, 3,500 years ago were more of um, a reaction against authority. The Indian religion was a sacrificial religion where animals were sacrificed to uh, win favour from the gods, and the Hindu priests, the Brahmin caste, had complete control over that. And there was a flourishing of radicals who sought to get around their control over religion. And you had this long period of um, massive experimentation, most of it um, as mad as you can imagine. And it exists to this day, all these crazy ideas, uh, more or less along the lines of um, imposing austerities upon yourself in order to win in favour of the gods, and then the gods would smile upon you. That kind of psychology. Um, Primitive, very primitive, very superstitious. But out of that experimentation, a few practices were developed which actually led to interesting things. Now, what's in the Yoga Sutra is essentially a formula for experiencing very attenuated states of mind, trance states, states of visions, and all kinds of things, which are essentially stress states. You know. I think it's time to move on from these early experiments and delve a little bit into more sensible ideas, which I'm going to highlight a bit later in the video. And there's one crucial thing, a crucial discovery that's contained in yoga, which doesn't seem to be anywhere else, is this idea of Kundalini. And I think that it's time I put out a video about that specifically, and this is what I'm going to do. Now, there's a real problem in me doing this, because in order to do so, I've got to make some personal claims. And so, up front, I've experienced Kundalini, and I'm going to tell you what I know about it. But I don't expect anyone to believe me. Uh, how can you? If you haven't experienced it yourself, I'm either a liar or, how can you tell? Right? You can't. So it's at the very best, what I'm hoping you might do is just hear me out and, like going to the movies, temporarily suspend disbelief. Right? And so I'm just putting on the record something. Now, I've been tossing and turning about doing this for quite some time because I don't particularly want to make claims about myself. There's plenty of people out there doing that. They don't. The world doesn't need another one. Um, but I'll tell you what's triggered me into doing this. It's the conflict in Gaza that's pushed me over the edge into doing this. Um, the conflict is essentially religious based. It's not just territory. The Jews think they are the chosen people, and that God gave them that land. And there's enough of them who actually believe that they have control over their government. And we've had this long history of turmoil. But on the other side of that, you've got Islam, which believes that the Aqsa Mosque is the site where Muhammad ascended to heaven. So it's the second most holiest site of Islam. And they believe these things. Uh, I mean, up front, I think both sides are just demonstrating outright madness. There's no basis that they can point to, you know, to establish any of this. Now, what's yoga got to do with this? Well, the meditation practices that have been developed along those traditions have unearthed um, a lot about human psychology and the sorts of um, things that a human being mentally might experience, and the subsequent uh, belief structures that are built up around these experiences. And it's worthwhile understanding that a lot of the religious traditions, whether it's Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, you Buddhism, you can include Buddhism in that. All of these things actually are founded upon a very small set of unusual mental experiences, which people apply a meaning to. And that meaning is there's an assumption in there that's never questioned. The assumption being that these experiences actually signify um, some higher spiritual achievement or state or realm. Now, none of that's true. All of this is these experiences, which, when they occur to a person, are very impressive. One of the most common experiences that a person might have who's been doing a lot of meditation, these things don't come along easily. Um, People see a bright light in a dark room. It can be very, very bright light that you internally are seeing, and that's used um, in a number of different ways, but it's interpreted in a number of different ways. Many years ago, I happened to be visiting some friends, and the lady next door was a devout Muslim. And when her husband was away at work, she would spend hours and hours and hours a day practicing, praying, Islamic praying. Now, on one of the visits to my friend, she happened to pop over. She'd visit for a cup of tea to next door, and she related this to me. Now, her interpretation in this praying, she was having this experience of seeing this very bright light. And she interpreted that she was seeing God. If she'd been a Buddhist and um, was experiencing that, uh, she would interpret it differently. Now, the experience comes about because of the one-pointed nature of her mind at the time. And it's just a reflex action that occurs because of what you're doing. Now, one of the things that's in the Yoga Sutra, it points out there's 3 steps to meditation, leading up to this Nirodha state, which is a trance state, a suspended animation state. And the 3 steps are that you withdraw, uh, consciously seek to narrow down the range of your sensual experience. So to do that, you concentrate on a single object and keep on refocusing your attention whenever your attention drifts away from that. Uh, in just the same way that if you're reading a book and you're well and truly into it, you may not pay attention to what's going on around you, or you're deeply involved in a TV show, and your attention is thoroughly absorbed. Other senses apart from the one you're focusing, using the most, don't consciously register. they register unconsciously, but consciously you pay no attention to it. Right? So prayer can be a method. Uh, in what's become popular in Theravada Buddhist practice, these 10-day retreats, using the breath has become a go-to method. Now, that's the first stage of meditation according to the Yoga Sutra. The idea is you narrow down the range of your perceptual um, experience, and then you further refine that to the point where your mind is one-pointed, meaning there, and they give a very strict definition of that, that the object appearing in the mind is, in one moment, is identical to the object appearing in the mind the next moment, meaning that the chosen meditation object, um, there's no wavering of the mind. Um, the uh, the same image or um, the experience is identical from moment to moment. So that there's various techniques that are used to achieve that. One might be the touch of the air, which is used in Buddhism. Another might be um, focusing your visual attention on something just out of range of where you can actually focus on it, and that image is the only thing you perceive. Um, it might be a tone, a sound that you focus on, and that's the only thing that you become aware of. There's all kinds of techniques that have been developed in order to arrive at that one-pointed state. So that's the second stage of meditation. Now, the final stage is removing that object from your perception. So there's nothing that you are perceiving, which is basically closing down all sensual perception and abiding in this state of what becomes a trance state. Now, once again, you've got differing interpretations of what that state means. You've got in Buddhism that this state is akin to nirvana, the deathless state. And it's held up as, well, all perception, all sense of self disappears, naturally enough, because you're not experiencing anything. And it's a lived confirmation of the philosophy that there is no self. But yoga has almost a diametrically opposite interpretation, based on not the state itself, but when you emerge from that state. And first big claim I've got to make here, I know this from personal experience. What happens when you come out of that state is you see yourself, you see your mind light up. The moment you start to emerge from that state, you are fully conscious. There's no phasing back. You, on emerging, you are fully conscious, but you perceive that your senses, you're not uh, aware of things straight away. That um, sort of comes back inside. The best analogy I could give on that is it's like, you've got a light dimmer in a room and it's turned right down and you turn it up, and so the room starts to illuminate. Well, because you perceive that happening, what yoga says is, well, okay, there's a perceiver of the mind. There's a witness. And the whole yoga philosophy is about um, seeing that for yourself as an embodied uh, experience, that you're not your body, that you are a soul, and you're subject to reincarnation. Now, they're totally different philosophies, but they use the same very extreme mental state as a proof. Well, I have to tell you, I can't really work out which is which. You know, I have that experience of seeing my mind come back into functioning, but there's this subtle question still remaining. Yeah, yeah, but maybe there's some other something to do with the brain stem or something. That it remains active in that state. You know, it's not definitive. Very difficult to be definitive about any of this stuff. Okay, but there's one peculiar thing which yoga is a part of yoga, and it isn't in the Yoga Sutra particularly. The Yoga Sutra has what's called padas, four padas, and a lot of scholastic work has been done on it. And there's a very strong case to be made that the fourth pada, known as Cavalya pada, was added later. That the original Patanjali Yoga Sutra only had three padas, and the fourth one was added much later, and possibly 1,000 years later. Now that coincides with other literature in Indian philosophy, yogic texts, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is when we're getting down to Kundalini. This text, um, once again, it's a flawed text. There's all kinds of extraneous stuff in there that represents you know, wishful interpretation. Uh, but it explains a lot of the yoga postures. It talks about meditation, and it talks about in some detail the process of Kundalini. And this is a thing where the in very exotic states of being, as part of um, not just meditation, but the Hatha Yoga Pradipika teaches about some of the breathing techniques. Uh, Yoga believes that the body, there's an electrical component to the uh, human physiology, and that it's described, I'm not sure whether it's in the Pradipika or elsewhere, as prana, and prana is described as being as the same as lightning. They're essentially describing electricity. So they're claiming there's electricity in the body. And they further say that the body can accumulate this as a store of energy, and it can be done. Um, the energy comes from the air you breathe, and to a lesser extent, the food you eat. Um, and so the breathing practices are all about accumulating energy in the body, and in combination with um, stilling the mind, this experience of Kundalini might occur. And further to that, there's um, a number of different pathways that this energy normally flows in. But there's a dormant pathway, which, if the energy flows in that pathway, it opens up an expanded pattern that the energy can flow in. Now, this is a very sophisticated discovery. It's not certain that the Indians discovered it. It's certainly embodied in Indian texts, but there are woodcuts, Chinese woodcuts, which are Taoist in origin, which also seem to depict um, energy, uh, and not the acupuncture points, not the meridians, other energy states, and I've seen such woodcuts. I'm not sure what their dates are. And there was a lot of cross-fertilization between the Chinese and the Indians, and Taoism also was a very um, deep meditative practice, also with a long history, an independent investigation into what it is to be a human being. Now, what's important, I think, in why I'm making this video, is that you've got all these religious experiences which are based on real experiences. In Christianity, the dark night of the soul. I don't know what's in the Talmud. It could be all kinds of things, but they certainly you know, have had individuals who uh, went off and did things which quite possibly produced some of these experiences. Um, you've got so many common themes in all these great religions. You've got the Buddha who went off and practiced austerities in a very extreme way. Uh, you've got Jesus, who was mentioned in the Bible. He went off into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, which is kind of a shorthand for an indeterminate period of time. It's like the flood and Noah's flood, that it rained for 40 days to 40 nights. All that means is it's such a long time. No one really knows how long it was. So uh, we've got some evidence that Jesus has gone off and done some austere practices in an extreme way, and he's re-entered society, uh, having had some exotic experiences and interpreting them to mean, in his case, that he was the son of God. Uh, though there's lots of argument about what he actually said. But you've got the same thing with Islam. Muhammad was he worked as a caravan, you know, uh, trade between the Far East and the Middle East. But the caravan trade was restricted by the weather, couldn't cross the deserts in certain times. They were impassable because of the temperatures and so on. So for 6 months each year, he retreated into a cave. And he did that, I think it's 20 years or something. And there are all kinds of reports of various exotic experiences that he had. And he ends up, dictating the Quran, supposedly, according to the story, dictated to him personally by the angel Gabriel. Well, uh, if if he'd had contact with some of these more advanced Indian traditions, he might have been corrected on you know, uh, you know, hearing voices and hallucinating is one of the pitfalls. Same with Jesus, you know. The Indian experimentation in discovering the depths of our minds, they went far further than any other culture, with the possible exception of the Taoists, which I don't have a great understanding of Taoism, but there's a few hints there. Now, this is the point I want to make in this video. And like I say, it's sparked by the Gaza conflict. And this conflict is, we haven't seen the end of it. You know, the conceit and the arrogance of both sides knows no limits. Um, the Islam and Judaism are arrogant, conceited religions. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get into trouble for saying that, but that's the facts. Um, as demonstrated by those cultures that really went a lot deeper in understanding uh, what human experience is about. Now, I don't expect anybody to believe me in my claims, um, but I do want to just touch on a slightly different topic. I've been teaching meditation in my videos, um, taking a totally different angle. Uh, I think there's a lot to be unhappy about in the methods that were developed that produce these results, especially uh, for modern people, our, our civilization. The one-pointed techniques, okay, I did those, and I got those, and I got the Kundalini result because I did those. Though I have to say that I haven't finished yet. I've got more to do, which I may or may not achieve in this life. Um, the They're a forcing technique. The yoga is a forcing technique. It's designed to produce extreme results, with extreme practices. And the one-pointed techniques lead to a whole range of experiences which um, are not to be taken at face value. Um, like I say, this common experience, relatively common experience of seeing a light. Well, big deal, big deal. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's the same sort of thing. If you've ever been in extreme pain, you'll hallucinate. You uh, extreme pain will send you into a state of mind where you know all kinds of altered states will occur because of the pain. Now, that's just in the same way that that's not contacting some higher realm. All these things are the feedback loops in the body which create a mental image as part of the experience. Seeing a light is in the same category. It doesn't have any intrinsic meaning. Just what happens when you're in that state. So the what I settled on, because I do think that there's something really, really useful with meditation. Um, my personal experience, first dozen years of training was yoga, and then about 10 years of Theravada Buddhism, and then I chucked them both in because I had problems with both of them. Things like, especially the 10-day courses, I saw too many people flipping out. Um, you know, there's a real problem with those techniques. Uh, what I found now, it's 25 years of doing those techniques, and then on top of that, 30 years of you know, independent investigation. So what I'm putting forward to people for their consideration is a different way of doing things. Now, what I've discovered is that um, simply just relaxing and maintaining mental alertness um, allows for becoming ever more consciously aware, uh, meaning not so much in any extrasensory perception sort of sense of the term, that there aren't things hidden in your subconscious. Like there's a lot of subliminal activity that you go through all day long. You can be doing something and you're thinking something at the same time, but you're not necessarily conscious of uh, what you're thinking about. It's a bit like driving. You can be driving and thinking, and mostly you're thinking and you're driving on automatic. Well, it can be the other way around. You can be focused on things. Your attention is focused on something, but peripherally you're thinking something, which goes by largely unnoticed. And this is the subconscious activity of the mind. Now, most of it, you don't need to know about it. Some things be wise to uncover, and especially when those things represent psychological distress, which is buried deep in the subconscious, and dictates to you what you might and might not do. Um, Now, what happens in these one-pointed techniques that people engage in? Their subconscious floods back all at once, and that's why people flip out. Now, I'm finding that um, just not trying to make anything happen and not employing any of these forcing techniques, that um, I, my subconscious gradually becomes known to me. And as a first stage of self-understanding, that to me seems the very definition of it. Now, beyond that, of all the different esoteric things that might happen, and seeing lights, auditory hallucination, possibly extrasensory perception, which those things seem to be real. They're infrequent, but they do seem to be real, which leaves, creates questions, at the very least, of, well, what is the nature of life and experience? I put Kundalini in a slightly different category. Now, the reason I do that is because when the experience happens, uh, there is a massive shift in the internal energy state of the body. Um, Now, just to clear up, there's a lot of, there's no other word for it, but bullshit talked about online about Kundalini. A lot of people who really have not the slightest idea what they're talking about, but that doesn't stop them. Now, I'm also aware there'll be very, very few people who actually experience Kundalini. Now, and I've had a few confrontations with people that have claimed it, and they don't like it when I tell them they're lying to me. Now, going back to the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which, like all of these texts, is a flawed document. It's got very good information, liberally sprinkled with a whole lot of Hindu wishful thinking and magical thinking. Yoga Sutra's got it as well. There's no absolutely reliable text out there. But the text is very specific about what a genuine Kundalini arising is all about. Now, I challenge people. I've got this, I settled on this challenge. If somebody thinks that they've had Kundalini, well, okay. The first chakra, which is of any significance, is the Visuddhi chakra. That's the one in the throat here. Right? That's the first thing which chakra which opens when the energy rises up through the central channel. Now, it's a very physical, it's unmistakable. It's a very physical experience. And there's a vibration. Let's see if I can make it. Right? There's a vibration that you hear. That's the vibration of the energy as it's passing up through the Visuddhi. Now, for all these bullshit artists I've encountered, I haven't come across many people who claim to Kundalini rising, but of the few that I have, I throw out this challenge to them. That, okay, I've told you what the first stage of the Kundalini arising is. You tell me what the second one is, and I'll tell you the one after that. Right? And I haven't found anybody yet that is knows what the fuck to say. Now, the reason I mention this, two reasons. There will be people out there, maybe, who'll see this video, who have experienced it, and they'll know from that that I'm not telling porkies. Um, and the second thing is to alert you, if that's what you're experiencing, then you know what it is. Now, there's a whole lot of wishful thinking and crazy thoughts and, you know, I mean, it's no wonder the aliens don't want to talk to us. We're such a stupid creature. Um, the chakras have got nothing to do with psychic energy or psychic powers or uh, enhanced abilities or anything like that. All the chakras are, they appear to be gates. Gates, the Kundalini energy or the energy of the body flows in a pattern, and it's a restricted pattern. And the energy is contained within those patterns, but there are places where the energy can expand into a larger pattern. And the chakras are gates which lock the energy, but they may open. And when they open, the energy can flow into a larger pattern. Now, what I find really interesting about Kundalini, it's not the energy itself, it's the fact this pattern exists. There's a dormant pattern within the body, pre-existing, for this energy to potentially flow. Now, that is a puzzle. That opens a whole lot of questions about, well, what's that all about? Um, there's this incredible intelligence hidden in the body. Um, that's what's interesting. Now, once again, I'm claiming this experience. So, and this happened to me in my 30s. 31 when it happened to me. So I've lived with it now for 37 years. I've had a lot of time to think about it. And I can only see one abiding benefit, which was apparent right from the start, that I became far more emotionally stable immediately upon experiencing that than I was prior. But that seems to be the only difference that I can see. I'm no cleverer than I was. I don't have any special abilities, uh, but I am very emotionally stable, um, which is extremely useful in meditation because it allows you to explore yourself with a very firm mental platform. Uh, that seems to be um, the benefit. Now, a little anecdote, and in part, this explains why I'm teaching meditation. You know, my meditation 7 words little thing. Close your eyes, relax, and stay awake. My friend who published that book, and as I say, you'll find the video where you can read the book for yourself. He'd experienced Kundalini. It's one of the reasons it gives me a great deal of confidence that, you know, I'm not crazy. He'd experienced both the Shuddhi and the Ajna. And for him, it was a very gentle experience. The rise of Kundalini can be quite traumatic. For me, it was quite traumatic. I went through a period of several weeks of hadn't gone, if I not had somewhere safe to stay, I might have been locked up in a mental ward, pumped with a lot of bloody drugs. Took a few, it took a few weeks to get over, culminating with the process, you know, completing a third step. I went through the opening of the Vishuddhi and the Ajna more or less at the same time, and it was very disruptive. When the energy reached the Sahasrara was when the emotional stability occurred. And there was a few weeks in between the initial and that third stage. And I can tell you that the Sahasrara is the same. It opens up in stages as well. And in me, the process is not complete. And I don't know if I'm ever going to complete it, I have to say. But the point of my story, uh, this fellow very rarely talked about it. I think we had a handful of conversations about it. We talked a bit about it after I had my experience, but there was a time, shortly, a couple of years before he died, he was explaining to me some of the yoga practices. Now, in the yoga training, there's apart from the breathing techniques and the asanas, there's a set of mudras, and the mudras are um, supposed to bring about this Kundalini arising. So we went through a demonstration of these mudras for me, what he was doing, and uh, in that conversation, I told him, well, I had experienced Kundalini up to Sahasra. And he looked me straight in the face and he said, that's not possible. Now that shocked me because at that stage I'd known him for 21 years, you know. Uh, he thought I was lying to him. He simply wouldn't believe it. And we never spoke of it again. You know, I never raised it with him again, which I regret. But it did open me up to, well, what's going on here? Now, he died in 1991, late 1991. He was a World War II veteran. And the war in Iraq was televised, a bit like what we're having to put up with, a bit like what we've got to put up with the Gaza war, which is enormously traumatizing for everybody. So, watching the televised invasion of Iraq brought back a lot of memories of his experience of World War II, none of which he ever talked about much with me. Uh, he um, he saw action. He didn't talk about any of the bad things. But I used to visit him. He lived in Sydney, I lived in Melbourne, and I'd visit him whenever I got the opportunity, go up and stay at his place. And I saw him extremely distressed. I'd never seen him like this, ever. Deeply distressed. And it was only 6 months later he was dead. Now, one thing I noticed uh, with my experience of Kundalini, there was a period of time where I was very conscious of the energy. These days, I don't feel it. I don't feel anything. I wouldn't know what my internal energy state is. But at the time, while it was active and things were changing, I was quite aware of it. And I noticed that on one occasion, I could feel this energy and rising up in the body. And I thought, oh, let's pretend I'm afraid of it. Just playing with it. And I've noticed that the energy stopped moving. It stopped still. Right? Now, being afraid of it is creating an internal physical tension internally in the body. And the moment I, gave up on that, the energy did what it was going to do. Now, this explains why I'm advocating meditation the way I'm advocating it. Why didn't my friend? Why did the energy not reach the Sahasra? He was doing all the practices which supposedly should bring about. And by the way, I didn't do any of those practices. It happened differently for me. Came, the Kundalini energy is said to naturally want to rise. And the yoga is all about creating the circumstances in which the energy can rise, removing the obstacles, which is why it's possible that the final pada, Yoga Sutra, the Kaivalya pada, is older, or younger rather, written much later, after Kundalini had been well and truly discovered by yoga. The idea is to create the circumstances that there's no impedance to the natural arising of Kundalini. That's yoga. That's what yoga is really on about. So internal stress restricts the flow of energy. And here I saw my friend reliving World War II experiences that, unbeknownst to me, he'd been carrying very deep-seated emotional conflict, which he'd never integrated, never resolved, and was reliving. Once on the TV, he was seeing Iraq being bombed and destroyed. Now, this is, I saw that, he died in 1991, and I spent the last 30 odd years exploring meditation independently of any of these traditions, trying to understand, well, is what is it that I'm doing? And what are the fundamental core aspects of it? When you strip away all of the belief structures that surround it, and the magical thinking and the delusional ideas of self-importance that people acquire. And what I think is really, really necessary is a silent mind, but it's got to be achieved in a gentle way. And the way to do that is to unlock all the um, lurking demons in the subconscious. And just like Kundalini will rise naturally, um, the internal emotional conflicts that might lurk will become conscious to you naturally over time as you relax. Now, personally, you know, what I'm doing in my own practice, I'm still meditating, I'm still learning. But I'm determined not to try and force anything. I just want to see what happens if you approach things in the most natural way possible. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I am an idiot and should do these practices and complete Kundalini arising, and I fail because I've chosen this path, well, so be it. What I think is um, the wisest path is to achieve a natural relaxation, a deep, deep, abiding relaxation. Now, what I've noticed is that the mind, in the absence of any emotional conflicts and unrecognized internal conflicts, the mind is naturally quiet. You don't have to do anything. That's its natural state. That's where it will go all by itself. And the internal state, if there's anything to do with, if anything useful to come out of the energy pathways changing, oh, we'll see what happens. Now, the whole purpose of this video um, is to put it out there that all these religious positions that people hold are based on partial understanding. Um, uh, the the conceit with which people adhere to their religions, um, followers following traditional ideas, with not the slightest curiosity, it seems, on how those ideas got started. That instead of um, starting with the obvious position that Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad were just people, that there's no divinity about them. They're just people who did things and got results and interpreted those results. Well, you've got to apply your intelligence to this stuff. Blindly following and believing that it's the hand of God or it's enlightenment or this is at the very least intellectually lazy, intellectually reprehensible for anybody with brain cells. You and then you've got the experimentation, like I said, in these ancient cultures. The the one we have the best record of is the Hindu history of Hindu experimentation, which shouldn't be seen as a finality, shouldn't be seen as something that represents a final achievement. It was an experiment, and an experiment still in progress. You know, understanding ourselves is an ongoing endeavour. And the sorts of civilizations that we will produce for ourselves, these things are a manifestation of the commonly understood psychology of ourselves. The cultures we produce, the civilization which we produce, is limited by our capacity for self-awareness and self-understanding. And we have so many difficulties in this world today because fundamentally we don't understand ourselves, or we have a limited understanding. So are we going to continue fighting over bullshit? Probably. Is this video going to make any difference? Probably not. But I'm putting it on the record. So I'll see you later.